I'd like to thank the distinguished panel for their testimonies and the time that you've allocated to be with us here today. Assistant Secretary Brownfield, as of March 13th, roughly $1.1 billion of the $1.9 billion in the Merida funding appropriated between FY 2008 and FY 2012 had been delivered. I understand at least $95 million in 2012 Merida funding remains on hold, and there appears to be between $600 and $700 million in funds yet to be delivered. What's the current status of the Merida pipeline, and should we be concerned that deliveries have been remained largely unchanged since fall of 2012? And are those funds being reprogrammed to align with the shift in priorities expressed by the Peña Nieto government? If so, what should we expect this reprogramming to look like? Finally, how will centralization of security cooperation under the Mexican Interior Ministry affect the on-the-ground efforts and relationships formed and the information and intelligence sharing that is necessary to get ahead of the cartels?
Thank you, Mr. Feely. Excellent questions, and let me try to knock off all of them in some sort of order. Our own calculation is that we have delivered on $1.2 billion of Merida assistance funding and appropriations since fiscal year 2008. And since Congress has appropriated $1.9 billion in INCO money, simple math tells you how much, therefore, remains at this stage undelivered. That would include, of course, about $200 million of FY13, which has not yet come to us at all due to the process. So my own figure is I'm looking at about $500 million that is in play right now. You correctly point to an issue, not the only issue, and that is that we are still working through the directions of, the priorities of, the vision of the new government of Mexico and Enrique Peña Nieto. I signaled for you, as did John, some of the areas that they have identified as priorities. We're comfortable with those areas. We don't yet have a defined strategy that we can say we can program and implement against. We're continuing to work programs that we have had in place for the past several years. You correctly note that a chunk of this money, $95 million, is currently on hold due to the other house here in the United States Congress, and we are working to resolve those issues together with the government of Mexico. Finally, you mentioned one specific issue that we are also working through, and that is the desire of the government of Mexico to have what they call the single window or the single point of contact for coordination of Merida initiative material through the government ministry, the government secretariat, the Secretaría de Gobernación. We are working through those issues. I have no objection to the concept in principle, nor does anyone. It's very logical to have a single point of contact, a go-to person for decisions, but how to implement that on a multi-$100 million program that involves dozens of different agencies and thousands of different people is what we are still working through. We owe you greater clarity on that. We're working it with the government of Mexico. I would hope by the time you call us here again for another hearing, we'd have a definitive answer.
Wonderful. Thank you. I would like to point out that for every dollar that we spend, it's my understanding Mexico spends 10. That's a pretty good bang for the buck. And that probably leads to the next loaded question. I know how important this funding is, but I'd like to ask this question, and any member of the panel or all of you can address it. But given the current U.S. budget constraints, the status of the Merida Initiative funding pipeline, and the fact that Mexico is a middle-income country, is continued aid to Mexico through Merida justifiable? And if you had to pare down, what areas would you argue for maintaining and why? And I apologize, my time's kind of run out, so if there's anything you want to supplement in writing afterwards, that's great too, but I'd love a short response on that.
Mr. Chairman, I will go ahead and start. The funding for the Merida Initiative, as you note, has indeed been on a downward slope. The reason for that, very simply, is that when we began this, we began with some big-ticket items that Mexico desperately needed to improve air mobility, to get non-intrusive inspection equipment to its ports, to get IT platforms, et cetera. As we have provided that leveraged assistance, Mexico, as you mentioned, has spent its own money, and that is right, and that is just, and that's the way it should be. Where we have begun to evolve, even before President Peña Nieto and his team came in, is a greater focus on training, on capacity building. This is the added value that we have by providing FBI agents, DEA agents, our justice sector people. I'll let my colleagues speak more specifically to the sectors, but I would say in general, absolutely, it is still necessary, and the partnership that this has not bought, I don't want to use that term, but the partnership that this has engendered has also had a very positive effect across the rest of the bilateral relationship, not just in the security sector. And you will note that Merida is very much a whole-of-government effort, and we have one of the perhaps unintended secondary consequences of our 5 years now of Merida, is that it has engendered on the Mexican side a genuine interagency process, something that, quite frankly, a decade ago didn't exist.
Mr. Chairman, if I could offer, from the INCL perspective, a set of numbers to indicate that not only do I agree with you, but I think we're moving in that direction. As we learned in Colombia, when your program is successful, part of the price of success is the numbers, the funding made available to you to address it goes down. May I offer you 3 sets of numbers, just mine, I don't speak for Beth from the USAID side, but the INCL funding in fiscal year 2012, we received from Congress $248 million for Merida. In the 2013 continuing resolution, we received $199 million. For fiscal year 2014, we have requested $148 million. The number is going down precisely as you suggested that it should, but from my perspective, it is going down in a predictable and systematic way that I can then plan against, as opposed to having a surprise out there waiting for me at the end of each fiscal year.
And from USAID's standpoint, we are transitioning out of several sectors in Mexico in order to be able to focus and concentrate on Merida and global climate change. We are getting out of health. We have already, in fact, gotten out of the health sector in Mexico. We're transitioning out of higher education and private sector competitiveness. And so our funding requests on the development assistance account have gone down steadily from $34 million in FY12 down to $23 million in FY13, and we see ourselves going down to $12 million in FY14. So we are very much in sync with your observation about the Mexican government being able to fill in that space and lead their own development path in those sectors.
You know, it's actually nice to see programs in government that actually go down over time. That's a good thing. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks.